Technologies Perspectives report, the latest installment of the IEA's flagship technology publication, which examines supply chains for mass manufactured clean energy technologies.
Now, of course, these are turbulent times in energy markets, and I should acknowledge that much of the analysis that we'll speak about today has been undertaken before the current events. What I would like to do is to highlight three areas from today's report that I believe will matter the most moving forward. The first actually concerns the market for clean energy technology, so the demand side of the technology equation. The main message here that my colleagues will talk about in a couple of minutes is that there is a shift in the rationale behind the deployment of clean energy technologies, especially those that underpin the age of electricity. Until a couple of years ago, climate targets, reducing air pollution were principal drivers for the deployment of clean energy technologies, but today they are just simply market opportunities for those that produce them. Their combined market value actually surpassed $1 trillion US dollars last year for the first time. The second area I wanted to highlight is the area of supply chain concentration for clean energy technologies. The IEA was actually the first to highlight the risks posed by the geographic concentration of supply chains for these technologies. It was featured for the first time in the 2023 edition of Energy Technology Perspectives. In this year's edition, we added two important dimensions to the analysis in this area. The first one lies in the complexity of ensuring resilient technology supply chains, because these are technologies with many different components and not a few. What we have done in this year's Energy Technology Perspectives was to apply a so-called N-1 analysis that you may know from the power sector and elsewhere, where you take out the largest supplier across all individual steps of a supply chain in order to identify key vulnerabilities. The second novel dimension to our analysis of geographical concentration is in the interdependency of markets. Of course, as I just highlighted, industries around the world are vulnerable to potential supply chain disruptions from China, but so does the success of China's clean technology industry rely on access to these markets. The final theme I wanted to highlight before giving the floor to my colleagues is industrial competitiveness, an important topic for governments around the world, regardless the industry involved, and the manufacturing of clean energy technologies is of course no exception here. China is, this will not surprise you, by some distance the cheapest manufacturer in clean technology manufacturing. It can produce clean energy technologies anywhere between 30 to 60% cheaper than other regions around the world. There are multiple reasons here for why Chinese production is so much cheaper, and they differ hugely by technologies. My colleagues will speak to the various reasons in a couple of minutes. But what is important is that addressing these competitiveness gaps is extremely important. Otherwise, if not addressed, industrial competitiveness can become a stumbling block for a range of policy goals, for energy policy, energy security, for economic policy, economic security, and of course, for each country's own climate goals.
The first point we wanted to focus on is on the market of clean energy technologies. We see here the greatest growth in terms of demand for these technologies, for those that are related to the age of electricity, as Timo mentioned, those technologies as well that are mass manufactured today. Technologies like solar PV and wind, like electric cars, batteries, heat pumps and so on. They have all seen important cost reductions over recent years, and at the same time we also see that as a result they are increasingly becoming cost effective in different regional contexts and in different configurations. We have estimated that in 2025 the global market size of clean energy technologies reached almost 1.2 trillion US dollars. What we mean by market size here is really the monetary value that is raised by looking at the volumes that are sold multiplied by the price of these individual technologies. And as Timo mentioned, what we see is that strong growth and important growth will be expected when we look over the next decades, no matter in which IEA exploratory scenario. If we look at the CPS, our current policy scenario that basically looks at a future energy system in which there could be no further change into policies that are already adopted, what we see here is that to 2035, the global market for clean energy technologies would double, reaching $2 trillion, which is equivalent to the market size of the global oil sector that we saw last year. If we look at the STEP scenario, which is our stated policy scenario that takes also into account those policies that are tabled but not yet adopted, what we see is a growth of 2.5 times the levels we saw in 2025. And that's despite the continuous cost reductions that we expect for these technologies as they deployed further as well. Now, there are other clean energy options we've been looking into, and here what we see is that the global markets for those are smaller in terms of the monetary value. If we think about low emission fuels, for example, we've estimated that the global market for those fuels last year was around $215 billion, and we expect a doubling of that market roughly when we look at the next decade, both in the CPS and in the STEPs. The greatest opportunities here rely to or are hinged on those fuels for which we could make their use in existing infrastructure already, particularly on biofuels, but there are other opportunities as well. We've seen, for example, that the production of low emissions hydrogen has been growing quite significantly, at times higher than often is realized. For example, we saw a growth of 80% on a year-to-year basis last year. If we look at the area of materials, low emissions or zero emission materials, so materials that are basically produced with a lower emissions footprint, we've seen that the market for those materials has been taking or attracting attention in recent years, but at the same time, we haven't seen large operational projects that have really materialized yet. We have seen also a steady growth in the project pipeline of expansions for this type of projects that have been led by different regions across different materials, but at the same time, again, a strong policy support still needed to unlock these investments further and to make sure that they could scale up. So as a result, what you see in the slide is that we don't see a big increase in absolute terms for the size of these markets in the scenarios that you see in the screen, both in CPS and STEPs moving forward. Now, we've talked about the expansion of clean energy technology markets, but of course this can only happen thanks to this big enabler, which is the investments in manufacturing capacity, those facilities that really produce and deliver these components and technologies that compound them. What we've seen is that the investment in clean energy technology manufacturing reached around $200 billion in 2023 when it peaked, and since then it's been declining gradually. One of the key reasons why this manufacturing investment is been declining is because we see at the moment a surplus of manufacturing capacity, particularly in solar PV and batteries. And this basically means that manufacturing capacity in place exceeds the current demand levels that we see in the market. Overall, as you see in the slide, there are thousands of facilities around the world, across 50 countries, producing different components and technologies within this group of key clean energy technologies, from solar PV and wind, electric cars, batteries, electrolysis impacts, and so on. But of course, every single facility is different, has a different configuration, has a different utilization rates, different production levels. And also, as I mentioned before, we at the same time are seeing clean energy technology investments on manufacturing facilities declining, which at the end of the day results on still China remaining the single largest producer of clean energy technologies around the world. When we look at these levels of concentration, this is very clear. What we see is that China is producing already today 80% of the solar PV modules and the batteries that are sold worldwide, 3/4 of the wind nacelles, and 70% of the electric cars that are sold around the world. And if we look at what this concentration could look like at the corporate level, again, this outsized role that China plays in clean energy technology manufacturing is very visible. Just to make this a bit more tangible, we wanted to bring forward a couple of examples here. If we look at solar PV, the largest producer in the world is the Chinese company Jinko Solar, which again could be comfortably supplying all the demand that we see in Europe for solar PV modules at the moment.
Despite ongoing trade tensions and at the same time falling prices of many of the clean technologies that we focus on in this edition of ETP, the gross value of international trade in clean energy technologies reached a new high in the second quarter of 2025. China's exports, which are a big part of this, of course, continue to rise, and they hit around $165 billion last year. You may have seen reports that came out last year that China's overall goods trade surplus hit $1.2 trillion for the first time. These clean tech exports would be equivalent in value terms to around 15% of that. And when we take a closer look at global trade in a broader context, it really underscores the point that both Timur and Araceli have made, that clean energy technologies are no longer just driven by climate policy, but they are driven by a broad range of drivers, and they are large markets in and of themselves. If we compare global trade in these gross terms, gross value of trade in clean technologies, to other technologies and commodities that are associated with the energy system, if we take things like grid technologies like transformers, battery minerals like lithium and nickel, and even mature markets for bulk commodities like steel and aluminium, we actually find similar orders of magnitude in terms of the gross traded value and similar participation and concentration among the top three countries involved. Another way to look at this is on a net basis, so through net energy trade balances. What we can see today is that the net value of clean energy technologies remains far smaller than the comparator that we're using here, which is the net trade in oil. Even in China, its substantial clean tech exports surplus is still outweighed by its oil imports, which were around 2.5 times larger in 2024 in value terms. But of course, today's trade in clean energy technologies influences tomorrow's trade in oil and other fossil fuels. And when we look ahead under the stated policy scenario, in this projection, global oil trade does remain more than twice the value of trade in clean energy technologies by the end of the decade in the projection, but there are some important shifts underway underpinning that. So firstly, Europe sees a strong increase in its net imports of clean energy technologies, but that in turn helps it to reduce reliance on imports of oil, and therefore reduces its import bill for oil. China's exports, clean tech exports, more than double over this same decade period, such that they are broadly equivalent to its net oil import bill in value terms. Sticking with China and returning to the example that Timur raised in his opening remarks, the kind of outsized role of China in global clean energy technology markets is hard to overstate. But conversely, the role of other countries' markets in shaping China's clean tech industry is also very important. If we take solar PV module production as an example, over the past decade, output in China has risen 13-fold and now stands at about 0.5 terawatt per year. A large share of this growth has been to serve China's domestic market, the portion shown in red here, but around 40% of the increase in production over that decade went to exports, which underlines this enabling role that international markets have played in the ascendancy of China's PV industry. If we take that same projection that I mentioned before in the net energy trade balances and project forward in the stated policy scenario 10 years, we see similar patterns, as Timur mentioned, emerging across some of the other technologies within scope in our manufacturing and trade modelling. Between 40% and 50% of the growth in the production in China of these three technologies shown here, battery cells, electric cars, and heat pumps, are destined for exports in this scenario. Of course, this outlook that we paint a picture of here depends heavily on the policies adopted in other importing regions around the world. Energy policies, industrial policies, trade policy settings. These will all affect the pace at which clean technologies are deployed on the one hand, and then the extent to which China and other suppliers can gain market access on the other hand. the sharp decline in profitability that we've seen among Chinese manufacturers of solar PV modules in recent years, which has been driven by oversupply in that industry and also intense competition and involution, as it's referred to, is a clear reminder of what happens when global demand, national demand, does not keep pace with the rate of manufacturing capacity expansion.
Karibu sana, Akwaba, Saubona, Ekabo.
Good morning and welcome to African Energy Week 2025. In this year's Energy Week, we commit to positioning Africa as a true global energy champion.
It is indeed an honor to be here at the 5th African Energy Week. 5 years ago, many of you in this room, you asked us to build something more than a conference. You asked us to build a movement that will speak up for our continent, that will speak up for an industry.
The story of African energy is one of immense promise, and the leading chapters are still being written, supporting a continental marketplace where innovation, investment, and ambition converge. Let us make this the decade in which Africa's energy sector not only meets its potential, but leads the world, driving prosperity, resilience, and transformation.
So by working together with respect, with strong partnerships, Africa's journey towards a just and sustainable energy future will prove it once again. Africa is opportunity, Africa is energy.
It is important to give women a seat at the table on decisions relating to energy security, particularly on the African continent. When the energy industry is opened and the market is opened and widened, all businesses can benefit. Diversity is good business for all organizations.
Africa's time is now, and Africa must take the opportunity now. Capital is very mobile, it's going to find opportunities somewhere. And as long as we can ensure that there's policy harmonization, we can go further together.
Across our continent, we are blessed in abundant resources: oil, gas, solar, land, the wind. We also have all the necessary resources to develop our country.
As we've been hearing from many of the presentations here, there is enormous proven resource in Africa. All over the place, onshore, offshore, everywhere else. But the investors need three things. They need that proven resource. They need a predictable rule of law that if they put their money to work, they can pull money out at the proper time. And three, they need a predictable enough security environment. If you do those three things, a lot of good will flow.
Yes, Africa's energy sector holds immense potential, but the truth is Africa's tired of just saying potential. We want now reality to sink in. We need to have forums that have outcomes that we implement for ourselves.
Over the last few days, we've seen incredible collaboration.
Our future and Africa's future is not for us to predict, it's for us to create. And we create that by driving those new chapters and produce energy for every African. That is a must, and our generation can do it. It is not impossible. Let's go, Africa, and thank you guys so much, and I really appreciate it.